Okay, today in this video, we're going to go through soup to nuts, what you need to know when buying a pair of wading boots or any type of boots for fly fishing.
That's a big brown.
Okay, we get asked a lot when it comes to purchasing wading boots. Now, these are going to be primarily boots that you're going to wear in the water with your waders, but we're also going to include two bonus style of boots that I think most anglers would benefit from, but most do not know of. So we'll get to those at the end. But today we're going to stick to some different categories to understand what is involved in buying a wading boot. If this is your first pair of boots, or if you've bought boots for years and years, I still think there's some things that would be good to understand, especially if you're in the market to buy a new pair or a different pair, or you want to use some for a different purpose. So we're going to start off, and in most of the videos I mention this, but your mileage may vary based on your budget. So if your budget is small, that's good. You go with the small level of purchase. If your budget is large, you're going to go a little bit higher end. So because somebody that may want to buy a more expensive boot may not need it, and vice versa, I just say buy what your budget allows. Don't worry about what anybody else is doing, and get what works best for you. So I'm going to walk you through all the other things that are involved in that, but I think budget is one that needs to be talked about. Most of the boots that we talk about today are going to be upwards of $100 or more, on up to about $300. So even then, we're still talking a fairly narrow range, but these are not the kind of thing to go down to your local Walmart and find something that's going to be good. So we're going to talk about different categories that will help you decide what style of boot to buy, maybe what price range, and some of the features and things that you are going to need. All right, first consideration, and this is one that I think gets overlooked a lot, and that is your usage. How often are you going to use these boots? And I'll get to this in a second, but the other usage part is where you're going to use them. So first off, if you are looking for a pair of boots, and you only go fishing a couple, 3 times a year, or maybe let's say once a month, you may not need to spend a lot more money or consider some of the boots that are more durable. Now, when I say durability, understand that all boots that are going in and out of the water, wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, they will eventually wear out, break, crack, and whatever else. It is what I would call kind of a rapid wear environment, because you're in the water, dirt, rocks, sticks, you name it. So if you are going to be using them quite often, I would tend to say typically, this is not always, the more you spend, the more life you're going to get out of your boot. Not always, but I think that is one of the bigger factors. So if you're going to be in there fishing every day, then you may want to considering raising your budget and looking at some of the higher end boots. We'll talk about some of the features in a little bit, but again, if you're talking just usage, how often are you going to use them? If you're not going to use them very much, then you can probably scale down really what you need. So that's one of the bigger considerations. But let's talk about now the biggest consideration, and that is the terrain and how you're going to use them, where you're going to use them, and what you'll see as you're wading. So first off, one of the biggest considerations that I look at is kind of the substrate or the terrain of where you're going to be walking. So if I'm fishing, for instance, we were fishing in England a couple of years ago, and the path or the river that we were on had a path, and the path was nice and groomed. You typically wouldn't be in the water, although you could sometimes step in the water. We still wore waders and boots. But if I'm fishing on a river or a creek that's fairly low-key, not much terrain difference, and maybe I'm in and out of the water a little bit, then I can probably look to kind of mellow out the type of boot that I'm going to be getting. So on the other hand, if we're talking higher gradient slopes, lots of rocks, faster water, maybe you're in and out of the water a lot more, then you may not want to skimp on the style and type of boot that you get. So the terrain has a lot to do with this. So I would say if you are using your boots often and under some gnarly terrain conditions, again, rocks, sticks, mud, dirt, water, kind of all of the above in terms of what you're going to see, then I would start to look at a boot that's got good support, clearance as far as the amount of coverage up to and extending beyond your ankles. Because again, if you're walking in gnarly terrain, you don't want to end up with something like a little wading shoe, primarily, just because of that, the added protection, the added support, and the added durability you're going to get with some of the higher end boots. Okay, so think of that in terms of pricing. Again, usually the higher price you pay, the better quality you will get and more of those features. So terrain is a big factor. Now, the other thing that you want to think about in addition to the terrain is where else are you going to be taking these boots? So for instance, if you have access to, say, a drift boat or a raft and you don't want to have boots with cleats, then you may want to consider a boot with a grippier sole versus a boot with cleats that is going to not typically want to be allowed in a drift boat or a raft because of the metal. So that's another consideration in that. Now, aside from the terrain and the things that you're going to be seeing, part of that usage is also going to be hiking. If you're hiking longer distances, then you may not want that super beefy, heavy, durable boot because it's going to be a lot heavier for you, a lot more difficult, a lot more tiring. I've walked for miles in some of the heavier, more durable boots, and I can tell you I don't like those types of boots for hiking. Now, the long and short of it is I would say if you're kind of a typical trout sort of fisher person, you probably are going to want more than one pair of boot from a functional standpoint and kind of where you're going to be wearing them and when you're going to be wearing them. So I would also keep that in mind. Nothing inherently wrong with wearing a wading shoe in the winter, but typically speaking, I'll keep my heftier, bigger boots for when I'm wading with in tough terrain. Also, if I'm wading in the winter and I for sure will have my waders, then the bigger boot, especially I'm not going to be hiking long distances typically in the winter, those lend well to that. So let's just talk about the next item, which is my tread. So tread is one of those things that I think a lot of people might overlook a little bit, but I think it's very important. So when I'm talking tread, we're talking either cleats that have spikes. There's other types of cleats that will have more of a golf cleat, and there's some that have bars. Anyways, between Corkers, Orvis, Patagonia, Sims, Grundens, they've all got different styles of cleats, but the idea is the same beyond the rubber sole, which in and of itself should be pretty grippy. Sometimes you're going to want to have the addition of cleats. So if you're hiking around in moss-covered rocks, freestone streams are especially nasty. It's like a round, smooth rock with a thin layer of moss. Boots do not handle those typically well unless you have a combination of a rubber sole and a cleat. Those two things combined make your wading experience a lot more comfortable, meaning you're not going to fall down and drench yourself in the middle of the winter by not having the right boot. So terrain is a huge issue, and so I would consider with the respect to the treads, so you need to look at what types of terrain and substrate you're going to be walking on as you consider which boot to buy. Now, most of the boots these days, and I think it started more with the Orvis Pro boots, those Michelin soles, are super, super grippy on their own. The Sims Access, Flyweight Access boots, I've found those are super, super grippy. I don't need treads with those. Another one that I really like in that category is the Patagonia Fora boots, and I've not used any sort of spike or tread enhancement with these cleats because the rubber is really grippy in and of itself. Most of the boots in our shop I've personally tried and used. Again, when it comes to boots, there's going to be some other aspects with respect to budget and maybe comfort, which we'll get to in a minute. But by and large, if you're going to be wading in areas that require cleats or anything like that, it's always good to either have a set of boots with cleats on them or have some that are removable enough, like the Sims Pro Powerlock boots. You can relatively easily add and remove those cleats. They pop in and out. They're not drill or anything like the other cleats that have to physically go into the sole. The the Sims Pro have the G4 Pro boots have the ability to remove them. So you could have them without cleats or you could have them with. So those are probably the most versatile. Also some of the more expensive ones. So again, it's a trade-off with the budget there. Most boots, if you do find a boot that you like, most of the time you can find a type of cleat that you can screw into it, and they're not necessarily brand specific, although some of them are. Always just pay attention to what is and isn't compatible. Now, let's talk about a little bit about, in addition to the tread, the comfort of the boot. Okay, so if you are going to be hiking longer distances, you typically don't want to have a big clod hopping boot. So if, and again, this goes back to budget, if you're able to have a second set of boots, I would recommend a lighter boot. So we're kind of on this end. Like I mentioned, the Flyweight Axis from Sims is one of my favorites. The Fora is probably my newer favorite. I've been using this one for a couple of years, or whatever, it's been a year and a half. And they are incredible. I hike with these all the time. They're probably my favorite hiking boot, right next to the Sims Flyweight Axis. Another option, and I'm not a big fan of hiking in wading shoes, but a wading shoe, and this happens to be the Sims Pursuit wading shoe, relatively new. I have a pair of these. I do like them. They're great for wet wading is what I've been using them for. But if I were going to have to hike a ways out, this would be a good option for that. It's light, it's relatively comfortable, and it's not going to weigh you down. Okay? So when we're talking hiking, if you don't want to hike with the boot on, you can always store it away. So if the only boot that you can get is going to be a heftier boot, because most of the terrain you're going to be fishing in is going to be requiring a heavier, more durable boot with more support, kind of gnarly guard against rocks and sticks, then hiking these is not a bad deal if you maybe throw them in a pack and you just use some regular hiking boots or shoes as you hike out. But that is a consideration. I always like to mention it in case people are wondering kind of what the setup would be. At a high level, though, I would say most people, most anglers that I know will typically have at least a couple of sets of boots depending on the conditions. So hopefully this video will explain to you some of those aspects of what you need and why you would need it. Okay, now let's move on to the next, which is warranty. Okay, this is one that probably gets overlooked more than most of the other points that I've mentioned, and that is what happens if the boot fails. Now, like I said, the boots are going into some crazy environments. Water, dirt, mud, rocks, sticks, you name it, the boots are going to see it. And these are fabrics, they're glued together, they're stapled together, sewn together. They will eventually fail. So if they do fail, when they do fail, and it's under warranty, it's always a good idea to be able to work with a company that has a good way to repair the boots, ideally in the United States, so you don't have to deal with overseas shipping, and is a company that's reputable, you can rely on. Now, I would say, and then we'll get the comments, oh, well, I've worked with Sims and their customer service was horrible, or I've worked with Orvis and their customer service is horrible. Well, guess what? Depends on who you're talking to, the time of day, the specific customer service rep. You're probably going to find some bad experiences in your working through warranty issues. I will say again, we work with all these major vendors, and by and large, the results that we've seen at a high level with customer service is very good. So with that said, these boots typically from the larger vendors are going to have a better warranty. You're going to have a little bit more of a, let's say, flexibility on how the warranty is serviced, whether it's send it in and repair it. A lot of these guys have repair facilities, or if it's a boot replacement type of thing, or in some cases you can repair them yourself with their guidance or with maybe some online tutorials on how to repair a boot. So warranty is a big deal. And that's one of the reasons I like the name brands like the Orvis, Patagonia, Sims, Grundens, you name it. They typically have at least more than one throat to choke if you run into some warranty claim issues. And worst case scenario, hit us up if you have some challenges with customer service on those brands, because we can help work through it. Now, this is not a commercial to come buy these boots. This is here's how you would do it. If you feel so inclined and want to subscribe and like our channel, we sell all these boots on our website. That's a small plug. But again, this is more an informative educational thing to help you buy the right boot for what you're looking for. Okay, one last thing when it comes to deciding what to buy, and this is one that I wouldn't have thought about, but I see it come up more and more, and I myself find, I like to make sure the boot looks decent. I don't like to wear a boot that looks like a big clodhopper, or it just doesn't fit right, kind of the look and feel of it. So when we're talking looks, you could throw comfort in there is probably a little bit better description of that. But if you're going to be in something all day, you want it to feel good, but you also want it to look good. Who cares how it looks? Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but there are some people that care, and that's just one of those other things that you may want to throw into consideration, whether it's color or design or style. Most of the boots are going to be constructed with some similar aspects to them. So if all things being equal, find one that looks good and that you like the way it looks and feels, and you'll be set. Now, as an added bonus here, we're going to talk about let's call it a category of boot that I think is newer in our industry and is gaining a lot of traction. And I wanted to call out the Grundens. We'll call them muck boots as a general category. But these boots, while you're not wading in the water, they're great if you're going out in the winter or rainy season, if you live around mud or anything, you live in areas that get a lot of rain. I don't like going from a good pair of tennis shoes or walking shoes or sandals or something, and it's muddy and snowy and yucky, and then going out of my truck, getting on my boots, walking around in the mud. So what I tend to do is I will buy a muck boot style thing. Like this is my favorite model. This is the Deviation boot from Grundens. So it's like a kind of ankle high, fully waterproof, obviously up to this point. It's got a decent tread on it. We also have the ones that don't, and these are just the ankle boots, the Deck Boss ankle boots. And their tread is more probably for a boat or just kicking around on the ground. Nice thing is with these, they're easy on, easy off. I would probably call them an accessory type thing to a wading boot scenario, but they are great boots to have in a wading scenario. Now, if you're going to be in and around water but not having to go in it very far, this also, in my opinion, would count as a good option for a wading boot. Again, you're only waterproof up to your ankle or just above it, but in a lot of cases, that's all you're doing is you need to maybe cross a little stream or you need to get into the water a little bit to grab something. So don't discount the use of these types of muck boots. Simms has them. Orvis is going to have some in the spring. They're a great addition. I think they're very functional and something that every angler probably could use if you looked at it. Anyway, to summarize, as you go to buy a pair of boots, look at the budget, look at what you're going to be using for the boot for, whether the train's gnarly, how often you're going to use them. Then look at maybe the tread types, different options you have there, or if they can have cleats added to them. Look at the warranty, look at the comfort and feel, how much you're going to be walking. Those are all going to be good characteristics for you to gauge when you're buying a boot. And then again, remember, usually the more you pay, the better boot you will get, the longer lifespan it will be. But then at the lower end, you can still get a decent boot and find the features that you want. They may wear out a little quicker, but sometimes you never know. You might find a boot in the lower price range that's going to do well for you. We'll have these listed below. Check them all out. Check us out on the website, flyfishfood.com. If you have any questions or comments, drop them below. We'd be happy to respond.